this hour, we're going to talk about an issue that falsely gets characterized as a liberal issue or a leftist issue, and we're gonna deal with that. And I think you're going to be surprised that the issue of medical marijuana is not such a liberal idea if it is properly enacted as a statute. Joining me in studio this morning is Representative Tom Trail from Moscow. And just say good morning. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thanks a million, Doug. Found my way through the fog here.
Yeah, that's great. And also joining us in studio this morning is our newest intern producer, David Lowenthal. And David arranged the guest today, and he's going to be working on some of the various guest programs. He's also the president of the, he's a leader of, you're a leader of the Conservative Students Organization, BSU?
Yeah, it's kind of in flux right now. Just we're going through a change of process. I actually haven't been too involved in it right now, but we'll see what happens.
But you formerly were. Tom, I think we need to set the stage and introduce you and let some of our listeners become acquainted with you, lest somebody say that, well, this is a wacko left-wing idea. You're a Republican. You spent 38 years as a farmer?
Yes.
And you also taught at Washington State University, taught ag.
Correct, 25 years, and then I worked a couple of years in Caldwell for the University of Idaho as an extension agent.
Great. And you have a doctorate. You're the chairman of the House Ag Committee.
Correct.
And I think you're pretty well qualified to look at all. Now, if you were, say, somebody from the other side of the aisle, I wouldn't be so surprised. And I'd probably also look at any kind of debate that you were promoting as skeptical. But as you and I have talked before the program, you wanted to begin the dialogue publicly and in the legislature about giving physicians the right to prescribe and administer cannabis to their patients, not to grow their own. Tell us a little bit about your concept.
Well, this started about 2 years ago when I talked to my wife's doctor, Dr. Janice Fountain, up in Moscow. And
it's okay. Go ahead.
And we started talking about medical marijuana, and she introduced to a couple of her patients that she prescribed medical marijuana for. They both had to live in Washington State where it's legal. But as a doctor's recommendation in Idaho, a physician can do that. And it soon became very clear that in the state of Idaho, we have literally hundreds of our citizens who have long-term debilitating diseases that have nausea symptoms, extreme pain, and some of these diseases are brain cancer, multiple sclerosis, AIDS, and other similar conditions. And doctors have found, and it's very controversial, that's obviously part of the equation, but many doctors in other states that I've talked to, and we actually have, if we get a hearing on the bill, we have doctors here in Idaho who step forward and testify that medical marijuana for their particular patients, and medical marijuana doesn't solve the problem for everybody, is by far the best medication for easing pain, improving quality of life, and much less expensive than the high-priced opiates like morphine and Oxycontin. And also the opiate drugs have the disadvantage of being highly addictive and toxic. I talked to one patient who had been on morphine for 5 years and had just lost the use of one kidney because of the...
Really?
And these high-priced opiates also, in many cases, produce side effects that are injurious to the patient, and you have to apply and high-priced other drugs to try to cure the side effects.
You bring up a lot of interesting wrinkles here, and let's kind of sort through some of them. State of California has medical marijuana. It was not put together by the legislature. It was by initiative, and the mob wrote the law. And you can go to Los Angeles right now, and you can see all of these cannabis buying clubs. All you need is a note from the doc, and you can go in, and they've got drugs that'll just astound you that you can buy that any other place would send you to prison. And you also have the right to grow marijuana. State of Arizona just passed medical marijuana, and they're going to allow you to have to use, I think it's 2.5 ounces per month. My goodness. My law enforcement friends said, what? 2.5 ounces? That's a lot. Maybe it's 2.5 ounces every 2 weeks. That is a lot of our concern. I really esteem the relationship between the patient and the physician to choose the course of treatment that they desire. But I don't want to go where you can just make it up and get high for fun.
You know, I've studied the process by which medical marijuana has been legalized in other states, and I agree with you 100%. The states that passed by initiative the medical marijuana legislation did not go through the legislative process where all the stakeholders, including law enforcement, the medical field, have a chance to look at it. And as a result, the law was implemented haphazardly, and today you have more dispensaries or clinics in L.A. than you have Starbucks.
Yeah.
The states like Maryland, New Jersey, New Mexico that have gone through the legislative process with a bipartisan effort, there are very, very few problems that have emerged, and they are able to tweak and control that very well. As a matter of fact, Representative Ron Paul, who is also a physician and obviously a very strong libertarian, joined last year with Barney Frank, maybe an odd couple, you might say.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And they introduced legislation to, one of my favorites, of course, to legalize the growing of industrial hemp, a bipartisan effort. Now, Representative Barney Frank this year in Congress has a bill that would, on medical marijuana, and he's teaming also with Ron Paul, that would leave it up to the states. This is a states' rights issue. I've often said that the use of medical marijuana should be determined by a patient and their physician, not Washington, D.C. and law enforcement.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. But we have to have the structure, which the legislation I have. By the way, I do have a co-sponsor, Representative Roy Lacey, a freshman Democrat from Pocatello.
Okay.
And which is another interesting point because I've been asked about the stance of the LDS Church on medical marijuana. Representative Lacey, who is LDS, indicates he feels the church would probably oppose the initiative. But he's LDS, and we also have a doctor who is a cancer specialist in Idaho Falls who's LDS, who is willing to come in and support.
David Lowenthal is our intern producer, and he's been looking at this issue and was the one that contacted Representative Trail. David, do you have a question?
Yeah, just again, I wanted to thank you for coming in, Mr. Trail, but I wanted to ask you, in a time of busting budgets busting budgets in states around the country, and in addition to more than half of the arrests in the United States being a result of some kind of marijuana or other drug possession, do you think that there is some benefit to more kind of open policies that would save states and localities a lot of money?
You know, David, there are several aspects to your question.
We had a mic failure here. I don't understand why, but go ahead and start again, Tom.
David, there are several aspects to your question. First of all, in the state of Idaho, there are literally hundreds of our citizens who are living in the shadows. They have maybe dying of cancer, AIDS, or multiple sclerosis and other debilitating diseases, severe pain, barely able to operate, and the standard legal drugs like morphine and oxycontins don't do the job for them, and their doctors can prescribe or recommend medical marijuana, and they find that indeed does lower their pain level and also gives them an increased quality of life. But they can't buy legally in the state medical marijuana, so you have several choices. You can buy across the state line, like in Oregon or Washington, but if you bring it back into Idaho, you can be arrested on possession. And a number of folks that I've talked to in these conditions are put in jail, fined, and these are individuals who are literally dying, suffering from pain, and barely able to operate. And if we did legalize medical marijuana, we'd be able to, through the legislation that Representative Lacey and I are proposing, or at least starting the dialogue, would be able to buy at alternative dispensaries, which would be under the control of the Department of Health and Welfare, the quality of specific medical marijuana that would be appropriate to their medical condition. There is also a excellent possibility, and in talking to some of our top officials in the Department of Health and Welfare, they administer 3 major hospitals in the state, and they deal with literally thousands of Medicaid patients, many of whom are suffering debilitating diseases. And medical marijuana would be an excellent alternative for many of them because of its lack of toxicity, non-addiction, and it's inexpensive. And there's a possibility that we could actually, with this type of legislation, save the state millions of dollars.
It's interesting. Let's go to the phone lines. Scott in California is joining the conversation. Good morning, Scott.
Yeah, good morning. I'm obviously talking to a more well-informed group than I am. But one of the things, I was just listening to the conversation while waiting to get on, not only will it save the cost of punitive measures, it's also a boon to the financial situation because marijuana is a profit situation. Personally, I don't use marijuana, but one of the things I picked up on the topic that if a pain reliever works, it works. I mean, there are detrimental effects of a lot of painkillers. I mean, Tylenol does damage to liver and kidneys. Some of the opiates are doing damage to the body, and marijuana is one of the less. But yeah, if it works, it works. I'm not opposed to it. But one of the ones that I think is vastly overlooked is the use of alcohol. I mean, alcohol. You had the Beverly Hillbillies with grandma and her rheumatism medicine. Yeah. Hey, if it works, it works. And there's such a social stigma against alcohol use that I don't, and like the one guy said, there's the clandestine use of marijuana, which is sad. And another thing that people are overlooking, that it may be legal in the state, but it's still against federal law.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
I don't know. Anyway, I just thought I'd toss that into the mix, and hope you all enjoy your day.
Thank you, Scott, for taking the time. I hope you call again. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Scott opens up a very interesting topic, and that is, number one, law enforcement and our state prosecutors are going to be opposing the legislation. Our local sheriff, Sheriff Wayne Rouse, who is just retired as president of the Idaho Sheriff's Association, and I had quite a talk about it. And he's actually neutral on the topic. And there has been the marijuana in general has been demonized as a gateway drug into harder drugs. Of course, we're talking about medical marijuana, which is a completely different issue. But if our good sheriff says, if you ask your local sheriff or law enforcement, what is the biggest drug problem they're faced, it hasn't changed in hundreds of years. It's alcohol or cigarettes. And they are legal, and in terms, if you want to characterize a gateway drug of leading our teenagers into the use of harder drugs, those are the two villains that our good local sheriff and others report on. But once you talk about medical marijuana, all sorts of fear and tremors of fear emerged in opposition to even talking about tightly controlled medical marijuana use.
Yeah. Scott, I appreciate the call this morning. All right. Tom, I guess the thing that concerns me, we talk about gateway drug, et cetera. A patient who would use cannabis, for example, prescribed by their doctor with the right amount of active ingredient, THC and CHC, both are cannabinoids, they're going to use that instead of a very, very powerful drug such as OxyContin or hydrocodone or morphine or something like that, which is much more toxic than marijuana. And I guess, again, I've got to go back to the fact that this is between you and your physician has got to be qualified to evaluate the makeup of that drug in order to use it, just like anything else. In terms of the amount of active ingredient in hydrocodone, you've got 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams. Same thing goes on with marijuana. And I think we need to preserve that right for the physician, because heavens knows they can prescribe much harder drugs than that.
That's a very good point. And also, the question comes up about if this legislation is passed and implemented, what are some of the specific controls on it? One is that a patient cannot smoke the medical marijuana in public or in an area where there are others. They have to do it in private. And also the fact is that marijuana for certain medical conditions can be taken in various forms. It can be incorporated as a food. You've heard of marijuana cookies, for example. Certain medical conditions, that's the best way to take medical marijuana. Through vapor is another form. And of course, those all are carefully prescribed by doctors. And also the fact is that patients would not be able to, or users of medical marijuana, not be allowed to grow marijuana. That's one thing I know the Sheriff's Association brought up.
That's wonderful. I think one of the biggest tragedies that I've experienced in my life is to watch somebody that has cancer, and in particular seniors who have chemotherapy or radiation, and that is the only drug that will improve their quality of life, remove the pain, remove the nausea, and yet they've got to go to the black market and buy it. We're talking about House Bill 19 with its primary sponsor, the chairman of the House Agriculture Committee, Representative Tom Trail of Moscow. And, Tom's no flaming liberal. He's a farmer for many, many years, and he's kind of taken a wise approach to this. We've got Steve, Beverly, and Gail standing by. John in Weiser called. He said that Mexicans raising marijuana in Weiser, and that there would be a black market if we legalized medical marijuana. I think we already have a black market by those that are growing it.
Oh, the black market, has been with us for years. That's no surprise. And under the legislation that Representative Lacey and I are proposing, the only place that you could legally get medical marijuana on your physician's recommendation would be through one of these alternative dispensaries. You would not be able to grow your own, and everything would be tightly controlled by the Department of Health and Welfare and the Idaho State Police. Anyone who would apply to get medical marijuana would have to get a card, go through a criminal check. The individuals running the dispensary and so forth would have to go through the same process. And the department would be able to set their own fee schedule so that this would be a revenue neutral program.
Why couldn't we've already got the free enterprise pharmacy system tightly controlled by the Board of Pharmacy. Why couldn't we use the pharmacies to dispense, or certain pharmacies?
That's an area that I haven't taken a really close look at, and I'm not sure if this is, in states where it's legal, if that is an option that's been considered. But, I certainly think in this dialogue we need to take a look at an option like that.
Okay. Let's go to the phones, and Steve in Boise. Good morning. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And, Doug, I just want to tell you how much I enjoy your program, and I like your music and conversation format. I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that.
The reason I'm calling is a little background. I consider myself as conservative/libertarian as anybody I know. I'm LDS. I'm kind of sitting on the sidelines on this issue. I don't drink or use illegal drugs. And what I'm wondering is, this is always framed as a conservative, liberal issue, with the liberals pushing for relaxed laws, which seems the opposite of most things. And I'm wondering why it should be any of the government's business if somebody wants to recreate by smoking marijuana, and that's illegal, but it's just fine to sit around in a group and get plastered with alcohol, and that's just fine. I've never heard a legitimate explanation of that, why one is bad and one is good, and we're filling our prisons with folks who, are out there for marijuana possession. I just, as a sideline sitter, I'm totally baffled by that. Can you explain that? And, Doug, I heard you yourself say, well, we don't want people having fun by smoking marijuana.
Well, I'm going to defer to Tom.
You have posed the moral dilemma. Alcohol, cigarettes, of course, are primary legal. They're legal, and law enforcement and studies show that, if you're looking for a gateway drug, our legal drugs are by far the greatest drug problems we have in our communities, and marijuana is sort of a peripheral sidelight. But one of the ways, we could we've had in filling our prisons up you go back to the 70s and 80s where judges were forced to mandatory sentences for folks even carrying small quantities of marijuana. And states that have changed that approach found that vast majority of these folks were for recreational use, which we're not promoting, by the way, in our legislation. If they received probation, no jail time, and community service and so forth, saved literally millions of dollars for the taxpayers and returned really productive citizens back to normal life with their families and their jobs and so forth. There could be tremendous savings along that line.
Steve?
Yes.
Anything else?
Well, I've, like I say, I don't use any of those things. I've got friends who have, the reality is what percentage of the population do you suppose uses marijuana right now recreationally? I'd guess maybe 10% on a regular basis.
I think given the change of the makeup of people, baby boomers, for example, it may be as high as 25 to 40%.
Right, and so it just seems baffling to me, that it's kind of a part of society now. And why do conservatives think that should be against the law? But, people who are out driving, obviously driving while intoxicated is illegal. But, when you see the damage that alcohol wreaks upon society in general, it just, it just baffles me that one should be illegal and the other's okay.
Well, I think what we're focusing on is the legal need. people have a need medically, and that's all we're focusing on. We're not talking about the rest of it. Steve, been a long time since you've called us. I hope you continue to listen, and I look forward to talking to you next time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, you betcha.
Bye.
News Talk 670, KBOI. David, you got another question.
Yeah, Mr. Trail, I was just wondering if you haven't entirely ruled out the legalization route, because I read just an interesting way to come at the issue. In a lot of circumstances, it's much, much harder to get, say, alcohol than it is marijuana, because what actually happens with marijuana prohibition is actually you force it into a black market, and it turns out to be totally unregulated, and people can just kind of do whatever deals they want. Alcohol, on the other hand, is brought into the presence. It's regulated. It's taxed. It's it's got bureaucratic rules after bureaucratic rules.
But it's safe.
Alcohol?
It is. I mean, because we have standards for it. If people were producing alcohol out on the side, we don't know what they'd be putting.
But that could happen with marijuana too. If you brought it out of the shadows, you could attach all those other kind of safety regulations. What happens is that what I've noticed is that you just kind of put it underground. So I was just wondering if maybe actually legalization would prevent extra recreational use than otherwise.
We got about 30 seconds before we have to take a break, Tom.
Well, we know what happened with prohibition of alcohol with the Volstead Act, for example. I don't even go the route that you're talking about. We've got a very conservative state here, and so we've deliberately just focused on the issue of medical marijuana. We'll let others debate that question that voters turned down in California and several other states in terms of opening the floodgates, which we are not proposing at all.
Let's go to the phones this morning. Beverly in Nampa. Good morning, Beverly. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Yes, I've been enjoying your conversation, your topic. I also have an LDS, by the way. Uh-huh. I am from California. I've been here 5 years and love it here. I never did like California, but the one thing about it, I was there when they were doing all they were the first ones that suggested medical marijuana, gosh, back in the 1985 or 90s or something. Uh-huh. The problem is that the ones wanting it, we're abusing the privilege. And I think that I am for medical marijuana if it can be regulated and for its purpose. But I have a friend whose teenage son was on it, who was 16, and he just was bleary-eyed, his grades suffered, and I would never have let him drive. And I think that's a definite thing. It should be in the same category as drunken driving.
Beverly, we've got about 30 seconds. I'm going to let Tom Trail answer that because you are right on. I've had the same question. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, Beverly, your concern is certainly justified, and if we take a look at the vast majority of traffic accidents we have and deaths, vast majority of these, of course, are related to alcohol. In terms of the impact on the teenager you mentioned, marijuana, and I'm not sure if you were saying was on medical marijuana or just in general.
Just general.
That is a problem that would have to be tightly regulated.
Hey, you can't take OxyContin or any pain relief like that and drive legally, Beverly. I know a lot of people do it, but it's not right. Beverly, I've got to go, but I sure appreciate the conversation. Look forward to talking to you again.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Bye. Boy, we could go on and on talking today. Representative Tom Trail will not be a stranger to these microphones. Appreciate you coming in today, Chairman Trail. And we look forward to monitoring House Bill 19 and also talking to you about some other agricultural issues. Remember the gunfighter's motto, ride hard, shoot straight, and always speak the truth. I'll see you on the radio tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. on News Talk 670 KBOI.